Good morning.
Oh yeah, afternoon for me.
Afternoon, that's right. Wow. Yeah,
That's
both.
so true. Yeah, I can't
Oh,
wait to tell you about this journey I've been on the last couple of days. Uh,
please, let's start
yeah,
there.
so I volunteer as a psychologist for the spiritual community to evaluate ministers quarterly, and because we meet quarterly and it's a spiritual community, it's supposed to be about spiritual deepening. Like it's not like more work. It's like how do you be of service but be transformed yourself. So we take turns doing an odyssey. So one time in the years that you serve, you basically share your life story in 90 minutes, like 3 half-hour increments over a weekend. And it
Woo.
happened to be my turn. And because I'm in this like intense 3 week period, I actually didn't put a lot of energy into it until the day before. And then I was like, oh, what am I going to talk about? Like, how do I sum up 47 and a half years in 90 minutes?
Mm.
Um, and so it had me like I like went through childhood pictures, and it was like so interesting to like see myself as a kid. And I don't have a lot of childhood pictures because there was a flood that happened when I was in graduate school that like took a lot of my childhood pictures away from me.
Oh, that's
And
horrible.
yeah, and but my mom died in October of 2017, and that was like a really pivotal time period for me. So I could feel like all the grief like come up for me again. So I thought we could chat about like what have been significant like moments in our life in our odyssey that
Hmm.
kind of have really shaped us. Like
Absolutely.
so, yeah, and yeah,
Do you wanna start? I need I can come up with,
sometimes, yeah.
yeah.
Um, well, I think about how much like well race is like such a thing that plays through, but I it had me thinking about like the women in my life who have helped shape me. Like I think about like my father's mother who lived with us my first year of my life, and then she passed away. And then after that, I went because my parents were like in the part of their life where my dad was going to school to be a pharmacist and my mom was a new nurse, and they didn't have that extended family to help support them. So I actually went to go live overseas with my father's this older sister and her new family. I did that for a couple of years actually, and I came back for preschool. So I think about like, what does that do to a person to
Wow.
spend like to basically like begin to build a like a in a new relationship with your biological parents, like in the 4 or 5 year old
Ooh.
range, where English and learning the English language at that time too. And I remember, like, I have this felt memory of going to preschool, and that was the first time that I was in a sea of white faces,
Oh,
because
wow.
prior to that, I hadn't. Um, so I just think about like, what is it like for people who immigrate? Like, my story is like weird because I was born in the US and then left for a couple of years and then came back. And all of that is like like not pre-verbal, but like in my mind,
Almost.
pre-verbal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, and thinking about like how that lives in my body, that whenever I enter a new space that's predominantly white, there's a little bit of frozenness
Of
that
course.
happens to me. Like it's almost like I'm like orienting, like, is this safe? Can I be myself? Which is so interesting to be in this Black body and like navigating a lot of predominantly white spaces. So I would say that. And then like often in high school feeling like I didn't quite fit because I was, there were only two Black people in my entire high school. Not my entire high school. That might actually be true, but so in my grade at least.
Okay.
And and we weren't friends. Like we knew of each other,
Mm.
and so like that navigating adolescence in that way, and because my parents were both born and raised in Haiti, they like had a totally different mindset of like what needed to happen. And so like the things that like people tend to struggle with in adolescence, they couldn't be my support around those kinds of things, like the social stuff, because for them it was about, you come to this country, you work hard, like all the other stuff is kind of like suck it up, pull yourself up by the
These are
bootstrap
all
kind of mentality.
distractions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then like the college years where I met my spouse, Chris. And then like there were like lots of work related stuff. But then I think when my mom died in 2017, it like said, wow, like to be a Black woman in the United States and to hold so much the mental load of the family and the weathering effect, like you might die younger than expected because just the stress of being a woman, but then also being a Black woman. And what kind of changes can you make? What are you afraid to do that you can do now and not wait? Because I remember my mom kept saying, I'll wait till I retire. But then she died within 2 years of retirement. And so I don't want to live in that. So that's like my broad strokes kind of stuff. And my son turned 16 today. So like mothering. Yes.
Yeah. 16.
Yeah, 16.
Oh, there are so many rabbit holes to go down. I'm going to try to really like not diverge too much and stay with the theme. I'm so curious though. And I'm also trying to not be a therapist because I'm like, oh my God, what was this like for you? What was that?
I know, right? Yeah. Like, you mean honestly, I was like, oh, I wonder about how this is connected. This is connected.
So many questions, so much curiosity, but I'm going to try to stay focused. What I am curious about is what it was like for you as an individual, like to think and marinate in all of this while you were preparing, because to think about all of the big impactful things in your life is a big deal in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then to condense it into 90 minutes and share it with people.
Yeah.
That's so much.
Yeah. And I think the part of me that likes to hide could really feel like this is really tender to share like with these 15, 16 other people via Zoom, like these like the joy and the heartbreak of my life. And to think about like, because they were 3 half-hour increments, and I played music, the beginning and end of like music that was significant to me, either now or in those time periods, which was like really beautiful to also like cap them with music, or to begin and cap with music. But also like this idea of like, I've come a long way to be able to share these parts of myself, because like, you know, even a decade ago, I wouldn't have even been able to do that. Probably even before my mom died, I wouldn't have been able to share like these. I would have given a superficial version of my life story, because I wouldn't have felt, I think, like secure enough inside of myself.
Yeah.
Or because these people are not people I'm super close with. I see them like a couple times a year. I have no other relationships with them, but it just felt like this is my story to tell. And it was more for me than for them. Like, I'm sure we are closer because they know me in a different way. But yeah, I think, and it makes me think of some conversation you and I had like a couple months ago, maybe, about, I just want authentic relationships these days. I don't want the superficial. I actually get irritated when I ask people like, how are you? And, or let's say I text someone because I haven't chatted with them in a while, and I'm like, oh, what's going on in your life? And like, they say, oh, it's good. And then I hear from somebody else, like, they got a new job. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just say that? Like, I'm just like, I don't have time for this. Like, if you don't want to go deeper, I know that there were years of my life I didn't go deeper either. So
totally. But there's a feeling of growing past that and needing something different. That's sounding really expansive and lovely and true to you. Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. So it felt good for you to just kind of like show up and get to speak honestly about who you are and how you got to be who you are and all the people and experiences and whatever.
And to let myself be emotional about it, because some of these things are raw because I don't touch them much. And because even though it's been 6 years since my mom died, there's a part of that grief that never goes away.
Of course.
And so like to touch it, especially as we approach like the anniversary of her death, it's just like, and the ways in which my nuclear family has never been the same since she died. So like, there's a living reminder every day of like, my nuclear family has ceased to exist in some ways because there are ways in which my mom kept the relationship together that now I have an individual relationship with my sibling and with my dad, but there isn't the three of us having a relationship together.
Yeah. That's all hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I'm feeling a lot. I'm also wondering if it's okay to ask, because I think I've had moments of, I've always been pretty vulnerable, for better and for worse, right? Like, and more reflexive rather than intentional, which is something, so that's my journey with vulnerability, is how do I make it more intentional? How am I vulnerable with people who are, where it's okay and it's safe to be vulnerable with them, rather than just like, this is who I am and I do it without thinking about it, and then that comes right in the ass, and that's a problem. But as I've navigated my own journey with vulnerability, I have shown up sometimes in spaces where I'm just like, this is me and this is who I am and it's authentic, but and it's for me, I'm not doing this for you. And there have been moments of that where that feels just kind of matter of fact and like emotionally neutral. But then there's also been moments of that where it feels like I'm armoring myself in some way. Like, it doesn't really matter what you think or how you perceive me or how you receive this. I'm doing it for me and whatever. I'm wondering for you, if you were able to receive that, like that witnessing that can be so healing and transform, like what, with the witnessing, were you able to receive it?
Yeah, I really do. Yeah. And I think that's been the family of origin trauma that I've had to work on as an adult, right? Is that I didn't always feel seen. And hence I tried to make myself not seen for a good chunk of my life. And so, and I think that's just the family I grew up in. I don't think that my parents were really seen either. Right. Whether they came from a big family and they were like the youngest child, or whether they were, you know, my mom's mom died when she was like 6. And then she didn't have a close relationship with her stepmom. It was actually quite abusive. And so she was the oldest. So like, I think that there are ways in which they weren't supplied with the muscles or the even knowing like this is a part of parenting, right, is to like, right. It's like, and I almost feel like that is parenting of the last like 20 years or so. Like, I don't feel like that was the parenting of my childhood. Or at least not in the Haitian community. I didn't see a lot of families where that happened. And it's funny because talking to some of my cousins, like I thought like they were all receiving like this thing I wasn't, but like hearing their own relationship issues nowadays, like, oh, they too also didn't get that kind of emotional intelligence.
Attunement.
Yeah, like they didn't get that. And so to think about like, how can I receive that? How can I give it to my kids in a different way? And that's something I've tried so hard as a mother, is to like allow them to be seen, but also to like cheer them on for the little things. And when my youngest one appears to be going the way of me as a kid, of like making her small and thinking like her little things don't matter, like really encouraging her to take up space. Right. And I think, that's been the gift of adulthood, I think. And I think because Chris's family, the strength that they have is really seeing each other and attuning in that way, which I think has helped me earn some secure attachment, which has been a difficult journey and yet worth it.
Totally. Oh, that's amazing. We called it a witness when I was a kid, and I did something similar. I was 15, so a lot less to feel and think my way through. But I talked about some of the pivotal moments in my life. at that point. And it was so, oh God, that's funny that it can be that long ago. And it felt so good to be seen, right? And like more than seen, to have people actually emotionally attune, right? Not just bear witness, which was the only real requirement, but to emotionally attune and to sit with me in my heartbreak and feel it with me, and celebrate things with me. That was just such a powerful experience for me. And so I'm glad you got to feel that when you gave your Odyssey. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
What's coming up for you as you think back to that long ago time, and how much has gone since then?
I know, right? Yeah, I think what you were just talking about in terms of attunement, I learned this like media trick where if I hinge my glasses on my hair, there won't be reflection. Yes, there we go.
Oh, that's a good trick.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe and Jess. I think what you just said about just emotional attunement and like being seen, like, and truly seen, because when you're truly seen, you don't just watch something and have no reaction, right? Like you're truly seeing someone and hearing someone, you're responding to them. Like that's the crux of emotional attunement, right? And how much I have just craved that throughout my life, because I think same in terms of family of origin stuff. There's been a lot for me to work through over the last 20 plus years, and in terms of understanding why that wasn't there. And so that brings up a lot, and it's validating. I'm sad for you, that you didn't get that and your family didn't get that. And it's validating because I do think there's something about just like parenting pre-2000, maybe pre-90s. I don't know exactly when there was a shift. But I think there's something probably universal about just like the time and the level of consciousness in terms of parenting. And I also think there's something about intergenerational trauma when like you need to just get through the basics and put food on the table. And of course, that's not a thing that like my parents got to experience. They didn't get emotional attunement because their parents were worried about basics. And so you can't give what you don't receive, or at least not without a hell of a lot of work, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it just really resonated with that piece. And I think the freedom that's getting created in me, where emotional attunement is important, especially to have like secure attachments in important relationships, right? Like just there's no way around that. Can't feel loved and comfortable if you feel like you're never seen and heard.
Yeah.
And I am realizing that so much of what you and I talk about when we talk about like race and DEI is that like the oppressor lives within. And we can get real caught up doing that, and it's easy to forget that like I too don't take myself seriously. I too gaslight myself all the time. I accuse my husband in dark moments of like having to be on fire in order for him to pay attention to me. But I too do that to myself, where I have to be on fire in order to pay attention to me. And so there's been, what a journey that has been. There's been such freedom in figuring out that like, yes, I can still have expectations of others in terms of how much they see and hear me and emotionally attune, but I can give that to me too. Like I should know that. I'm a trauma psychologist, right? I'm also a woman in her mid-40s. Like I've done half of my life. I should know this, but I haven't known it. I haven't known it. And so to know it now and to constantly reawaken to that reality that that's something I can give to myself has been so beautiful and empowering,
Mm.
That was a little
I
rabbit.
love that. Oh, I love that. That gift of self-love and
Yeah,
self-affirmation, which I think is easier to do if you are witnessed, right? If you have that attunement, right? And
right.
yeah, I think about, I had this really beautiful moment with my son yesterday where, turning 16 today, and the last academic year was a really hard year for us, as you know, and he had a lot of anger towards me because of I was a safe object in his life that he could, direct all of that. And he was able to say yesterday, like, I was unfair to you last year. Um, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like what the parenting books write about. Like, if you
That's
can hold
right.
space for that anger, right? And like be not shaming. Because if I was angry with my parents as a kid, it would have been shame. It would have been retaliation. It would have been like cold silence.
That's right.
It wouldn't have been you're a teenager,
This is normal.
working through stuff. This is normal kind of stuff. And it was just that beautiful like moment of because it was heartbreaking when he was so angry at me last year when he was saying he hated me and it was all my fault, that his life sucked. Like those were all really painful and I felt really alone with it. And I appreciated that like I had colleagues and friends who could say, um, like he's able to do this because he feels safe with you and he knows that he's loved. Like it was good to have that reminder because
Right.
in the moment I wanted to shut down for sure.
For sure. And again, we're human, right? So like, how could you not? It's the most painful thing in the world to see our children
Right.
suffering. And then
Yeah.
have that blame directed at us is, woo.
Yeah, this conscious parenting is no joke. Like to be
No,
awake and
no.
parenting is no joke.
Oh my God, it's brutal. It's
Yeah.
brutal. But wow, I'm so thrilled for you that like you got to have that full circle moment. Like, and that really speaks to your relationship and the conscious parenting you're doing, right? Because
Right.
I think the model that I've had is like maybe when they're parents, they'll
I know. That's
right,
what I was like. I was like another 10 years, 15 years,
right,
like,
long game.
yeah.
But to think there's room for that kind of self-reflection and insight so much sooner than that is mind-blowing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
incredible.
You gotta savor the moment.
Yeah,
Savor
right,
the moment.
right. No idea when it will devolve back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But really speaks to like, right, to your ability to hold space and to like all the stuff we talk about with like meditation and just being at a higher level of consciousness, right? It's just like that observation.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way, right? You could have done that without your practices,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And even just, I remember like when the kids were young, I did this parenting as a spiritual practice, like course, which was really helpful in helping me like think about how I can show up like from a place of love, even when I'm tired, even when I'm stressed to capacity, even when what's being directed at me is overwhelming, and thinking about like how do we work through our family of origin stuff while also parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's that dual awareness of like recognizing I'm feeling triggered right now and that's about my own stuff,
That's right.
right? And not really about this little person across from me, and that they are developing their own unique personhood separate from me and I'm just a guide on the process. And like some days are easier than others to like embody that.
Totally. And what I love that about what you just said that's like in between the lines is that there's so much shared power and shared humility, ideally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, I'm not the expert telling you how to live your life or turning you into a good person, right? That I'm learning from you in the all the time. Like that's best
Mm-hmm.
case scenario, what it can be. And that if we can think about parenting and really like all of the things that challenge us in that way of like what's the
Mm-hmm.
lesson here, this is showing
Right.
me that I've got some work to do in this area. And I don't have to feel ashamed about that. I'm human. Like, so let me just like get curious and dig in a little bit. But we're wired to avoid pain, right? So like this is, it's challenging work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then navigating, I think, the cross-cultural lines, like recognizing like my dad and my aunts and my uncles, they have a different worldview about like the relationship between parent and child, right? And they have a different orientation around like discipline and control and shame as a mechanism to, get people to become those good people. And like, how do I hold that, even if it's not the choice that I'm choosing to make in my parenthood, but how do I not dehumanize that strategy and that work? Because there are many cultures that operate in that way. And I don't want to be this person who's like, there's only one right way.
Right. That's such a good point. That's worth me really sitting with for a long time. Through everything that we're talking about, I'm just thinking about how for me, this conversation is so much more meta than it would have been, I don't know, even maybe just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because when I think about what are like the big things that move the needle in terms of my life, I think I would have come back to really specific events and like moments in time with people. And now it feels just a lot more nuanced and complicated and more like the 30,000 foot view than like the immersed in like my childhood cancer diagnosis, this event that happened at this, and that's what I was hearing you say when you were walking through it. And that's what I hear you saying, even when talking about like parenting, it's cool to kind of look back and think about themes and more overarching challenges that I'm probably gonna sit with for the rest of my life, right? It's not this event that started and ended and now it's in the past, and it's like, it's more of these overarching themes that I need to continue to just sit with, rather than isolated but profound incidents. So it's not that those things don't matter anymore. It's just this other layer that's getting unpeeled, which I think is really interesting. That felt random.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when I was sharing the Odyssey, I was telling Chris about this, is that, a younger version of me would have been caught up in like these particular like trauma points or like, right. And like, I was like, what felt like when I was a grad student, what felt like so poignant, like were these moments of misattunement and these moments of like heartbreak. And now it's like, it feels so old. Like it feels like so like, I can remember it happened, but it's not the thing taking up a lot of space.
That's right.
And so like, I don't know if that's just enough healing has happened. It's been integrated. And that certain themes keep recurring, right? Like, and so to me, it's more about the themes and what am I doing now? And how do I want the latter part of my life to take shape?
Absolutely. And hearing you talk about it more from this place of themes was really, and continues to be like really helpful for me, because what came up immediately was like, oh, okay, so I've got to come up with like things in my life and I feel on the spot and all this urgency and and then when I was like, okay, but let that go and be present, because I want to hear about your experience. And listening to you talk about it, it's like, oh, it's a whole different set of things for me. So I could have just pressed play on that very, very old tape, but it felt off and it felt reflexive. And so it is thinking more about parenting And like, what are the lessons that parenting is teaching me about martyrdom, about codependency, about self-care, and how we can take deep, slow care of ourselves and other people that we love very much so. But like, but taking care, one of the things, the biggest lessons that I think I'm so actively working on and have been is like, how do I invest in me when all of the messages from my ancestors, from society, from gender expectations, from whatever is all about do for others, do for others, do for others, and how that's a narrative that actually is just so false in so many ways. And that I'm learning that when I do take really good care of myself, I am also taking really good care of the people around me. And it's not a like, pour into yourself so you can pour into others. Like maybe that's there somewhat, but that it can even be simpler than that. That just by taking care of myself, I am taking care of the people around me. Like, end of the sentence, end of the narrative. And that's a theme I'll be playing with like for the rest of my life. But that's an interesting thing that's happening in my own life that I think is a big part of how I am hugely changing as a person. Because it sounds simple, but it shows up in the tiniest and most major of ways and everything in between, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I keep thinking for myself, the tape or like the rewiring I keep doing over the probably last half of my life has been like, it's okay to take up space. It's okay to let people get to know you. Right. I even think about like times I've been a leader, like the recurring themes are always the same. Like sometimes it's hard to read me, or sometimes people want to know me better. And so I've tried really hard in the last several years to like let people get to know me better. So even in this new like director job is like leading from radical candor, leading from a place of vulnerability, or like transformational leadership, right? Like and I think part of that is disrupting white supremacy culture that says that that's not professional, or like we leave parts of ourselves when we go to work, and like how can it be integrated? Like how can all of that be part of me? Like yeah, I don't want to live this compartmentalized life, which doesn't mean I don't have boundaries, but it says like what I used to think were boundaries were a little too rigid. Like people, like it walled me off, which made me like, I was probably one of those people who said like, I'm really self-reliant. I don't need this attunement stuff. I don't even know if I knew the word attunement, back then. I don't even think I knew it in grad school, but then like over time, I was like, no, you've like built this armor that makes you think you don't need it, but you actually need it. And you actually would thrive more if you let it in.
Oh, yes. And interesting again, because we have we're in relationship with vulnerability in different ways, right? And sometimes I think maybe opposite ways, although I don't like duality. Right. Where I think my journey, because everything's about feeling loved and connected, right? I feel like that's what
totally.
If we deconstruct things enough, that's always going to be like the juicy center of something. But I think the way that I've been showing up in my life, but I think there's been so much growth for me in terms of my business and my leadership style has been like, I'm vulnerable as a reflex. And I think one of the side benefits is that people then feel close to me, right? What I didn't realize is that being vulnerable as a leader reflexively rather than intentionally started to morph into people pleasing. That I was like, if I just explain to you and like show you my heart, then then you'll understand this business decision or this leadership decision, that I just have to be more vulnerable. And then it'll be different. And then it'll be all kumbaya. And like, we're gonna like be like really aligned and like happy and da, da, da. And I've really needed to step back and be more intentional about my vulnerability and lean into sturdy leadership that is not power over or like hoarding power, but just like the actual authority that I do have in my company. And navigating that within the lens of being, you know, a practice and a person that believes in collective liberation and anti-racism has been exceptionally tricky work, right? Like, but I think that's been an interesting thing, is people aren't entitled to my heart. And my heart, showing my heart, should not be a shortcut to connection, which is something that inherently takes time. And the only way it's healthy is if it's reciprocal. And so sturdy leadership that's a little more boundaried has been my growth edge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I would agree, like, that we are doing that dance of like, you're trying to shore it up a little bit more and be more like intentional about it. And I'm trying to like be more open about it and to recognize like, yeah, that there is good things can come, because for so long it was like, you're going to get hurt. Like, people are going to use this against you.
Yeah.
Like, it's not worth the risk.
Totally. And that dance that so many of us do, where we like operate in either we're trying to avoid that and run away from the possible rejection or hurt, or like leaning in too much and, you know, and finding what does it look like to be secure in me, which allows me to tolerate the discomfort of the unknown, and like, how is this over and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even seen just this year, like, some more I have felt closer to my father at times this year, because he has also risked sharing more than he would typically share. And that has allowed me to then share more than I would typically share. And so, yeah, it's this reciprocal mutual thing. It really does. Like, if one person dares to take a risk and the other person holds it and then also dares to take a risk, like, that's where true intimacy happens. That's where trust builds, right? Like, if I'm the only person sharing and the other person isn't, then that's going to cause issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I love so much about that process that you just described with your dad is it's the lived experience of there is no such thing as one-way liberation, right? When you free yourself up, you're a lighthouse for anybody who can see you, giving them permission, you know. It's been a real awakening for me to do this. I think it's certainly showing up in my business, but I think one of the things that is really shaping me, again, going back to parenting, is like, how can I be boundaried with my kids and hold the multiple truth of like, you can be sad that I left early from your game, which means I didn't get to see your walk-off double that won the game. And like, and I can be sad about that too. And we can be sad that I wasn't there for that. And it was okay for me to leave. Because I have to think about me too. And Lincoln and Brooklyn, like, and I want you to have the model. This is the part that's unsaid that I hope just becomes in the water, right? About like, I want you to have this model of parenting or just living where like people get to have feelings and reactions about the choices you make. And they're allowed to have those feelings, but it doesn't mean that you did something wrong or that you should do something different the next time around. we can just have needs that sometimes rub up against each
Yeah.
other. We can have
Yeah.
feelings about that, and I can sit with you in your sadness, and it doesn't mean I did anything wrong. Doesn't mean I have to
Yeah.
feel guilty about that.
Yeah. And I think particularly when you're socialized into like a female body, you can sometimes like take on things in the relationship
Yeah.
that need not. I remember even just talking to Daphne this weekend where Chris and Jacob went to go visit Chris's family, and Daphne opted not to go, and so like afterwards she was talking to me and she's like, I think Dad and Jacob are mad at me, and I was like, you think, or do you think might they just be disappointed that you didn't go? And do you know the difference between the disappointment and the anger, right? And she was like, yeah, it's like, if you're gonna decide you're not gonna go and this is your boundary, people get to have feelings about it, right? That doesn't mean like you did anything wrong, right? And like I just like those moments of like touch points of like clarity around, you can have the feelings, but you don't have to own that. Like you're 13 and I don't want you to grow up to be this gendered person who thinks like if I set boundaries,
Yep.
that in some ways there's something wrong with that.
That's right. That I'm not allowed to have needs, wants, desires, etc. Certainly not allowed to communicate that, because that makes me bad or selfish or whatever the narrative is around that. Yeah, I love that you were able to help her think about that. Yeah, because it's tough. God, if I'm about to be 43, I'm still struggling with this shit at 43. I just cannot fathom navigating this in a helpful way as a teen. So
yeah,
lucky to have you.
Yeah, lucky to have you too.
Wow. Well, that seems like a good time to wrap up, huh?
I think so. Yeah. So good chatting with you.
So good chatting with you as well. And I meant to talk to you about this prior, but here we are live. I was thinking we should be reminding viewers that we're on all platforms at this point. And, if you, the viewer, if you're listening and you're enjoying it, we would love for you to subscribe. We would love for you to comment. We would love for you to rate and review it. Nathalie and I are in a place where we don't want to hustle. I'm not promoting this, right? Like,
I mean, if I'm like, if I remember to post like, hey, there's a new episode out there.
That's right. It's going to be this thing where it's like it goes up once and that's the end of it. So for anyone who is listening, if you wanna share in that with us, we'd really appreciate it.
And we try to release an episode like twice a month, usually at the beginning of the week.
Yep.
And we're just going with like what's the rhythm of our lives. So it's really wonderful to be in relationship with you and to not have it be super regimented.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. So I hope it's okay that I put in that little plug.
Oh yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I'm like, if we could build that in, then I can let go a little bit more about
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to Rest and Awaken.
Yeah, thanks so much. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.